Hello, everybody, and welcome to PEP, which is Passion, Empowerment, and Perseverance. I'm your host, Graham Salinger, founder and president of Salinger Coaching Solutions. We focus on empowering success by empowering people. And today I'm honored to have as my guest Jennifer Rollin. Jennifer is a therapist and eating disorder recovery coach who specializes in working with teens and adults with eating disorders and body image issues. She's the founder of the Eating Disorder Clinic and was named as one of the top eating disorder experts in the world by Balance Eating Disorder Treatment Center. She's also on the junior board of directors for the National Eating Disorder Association. Jennifer is a contributing writer for Psychology Today, PsychCentral.com, Headspace Inc., and the Huffington Post. Jennifer is no stranger to interviews, having been interviewed as an expert on eating disorders, body image issues, and mental health in various media forms, including Fox 5, ABC News Channel 8, NBC4, PBS, Fox News Radio, The Huffington Post, U.S. News and World Reports, Teen Vogue, 17, Girls Life Magazine, and Esquire Magazine. Jennifer also has a forthcoming book this upcoming March that she wrote with Dr. Colleen Richmond. The book is called The Inside Scoop on Eating Disorder Recovery, published by Routledge. Jennifer has a BA in Public Communications from American University and a master's in Clinical Social Work from the University of Maryland School of Social Work. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Great. Let's get started. I often begin by asking my guests about sort of how they got into their field and their passion for their work. And I do that because at Salinger Coaching Solutions, what we focus on is empowering people's passion, purpose, and perseverance. So those are sort of the themes of the show that will happen today. So I just want to get us start this conversation by asking you about your passion for eating disorder recovery coaching. So what about your life experience has informed your passion for eating disorder recovery coaching?
Yeah, so I wanted to be a therapist for a little while, but I didn't know that I wanted to be an eating disorder therapist and also coach until I went through my own recovery journey and recovered from my own eating disorder. And I found that when I was in graduate school, I naturally tended to gravitate towards people struggling with eating disorders. And now that's like 100% of the work that I do.
Okay. Yeah, so two things. You always knew you wanted to do therapy, and then through your own experience, you sort of found this niche of eating disorder recovery. Yeah, so what informed your passion at the beginning for wanting to do therapy?
Yeah, so I mean, I think I've always been a pretty compassionate person. Like I remember growing up and seeing homeless people on the street and thinking like at a very young age, like that could be me and having that like empathy already.
Mm-hmm.
And I also remember an instance when I was 12, I had a friend at summer camp who told me her parents were getting divorced and she was feeling suicidal. And even at 12, I felt really comfortable talking to her about that, even though at that time, I had no experience with depression or suicidal ideation. So I just knew my first passion was theater, and I thought I might be a drama teacher for a little while there. But once I realized that that really wasn't for me, that it was a hobby, but it wasn't a career I wanted to do, I was like, I know that I want to be a therapist. Like that's 100% it. And that felt really right to me.
Okay. Yeah, so you started off from like an empathetic place, but then you also went through your own experience. So can you talk about your own recovery journey and what empowered you to persevere in facing those challenges and come out in a form of what allowed you to persevere and come out on top, and what accounted for that resilience?
Yeah, so I think that it was a winding road, which obviously I don't share every detail of because they don't think
Sure.
that it's useful for my clients, but I do give like a general kind of idea of what I went through. So essentially, I was somebody who had never had great body image growing up, but it wasn't really a struggle for me until my senior year of high school, and then it would later develop into an eating disorder when I was in college. And I went through a lot of different things as part of the recovery journey. And it started out with the diagnosis of anorexia. And then I also dealt with like the fitness obsession, so my eating disorder took a few different iterations. And, there was a lot of steps forward and steps back throughout the process. But I think to go back to your question of like what helped me to persevere, because I mean, recovery is hard. It's definitely hard, but I also say like, so is living with an eating disorder. That's hard too. And there were many times when I wanted to give up or where I thought I would never get better. And I didn't even remember what normal eating looked like anymore. And I was like, I don't know how I'll ever get there. And I think the things that helped me were having a treatment team. I also had a mentor who was really useful for my recovery. Somebody who was recovered, who I was able to reach out to when I was really struggling, and that's why I also allow my clients to reach out to me between sessions, because I think eating disorders are 24/7, right? And having that support is really helpful. I think something else that helped me persevere was I was exhausted and miserable and pretty depressed and suicidal at times. And it just didn't feel like a sustainable way of living. And it was to the point where I felt like I do not want to live like this. I'm so depressed. I'm so unhappy. So I really did have to hit like a few rock bottoms with the eating disorder in order for me to want to continue recovery. And there was definitely a period where I was like, maybe this is as good as it gets. Like, I'll stay here. But I think like what also helped me was thinking about my values as well. And I knew that I wanted to be a therapist and I wanted to be able to inspire people through my own recovery. And that would entail like reaching, for me, it felt like getting to that place of full recovery would help me in my ability to help other people, which I'm really passionate about. And I wanted to have better relationships. I think my eating disorder really isolated me. I had very surface level relationships at the time. And I think that I knew I wanted something more and I was really unhappy. And that was enough for me to reach out and try to get help and keep moving forward. But I think motivation also can like wax and wane throughout that process. And I think that's normal.
Sure. So what I heard are a couple of things, right? You had some really fundamental relationships that gave you perspective, but you also had sort of a calling or a purpose, and you sort of knew that for you to reach your calling and your purpose of being a therapist, you had to also take care of yourself before you could take care of others. Okay, so the purpose really helped guide you in terms of getting through some of your own internal struggles. Yeah. So what other life lessons has your journey and your work with others who have gone through similar paths and similar journeys taught you about perseverance?
I think that perseverance doesn't always look the way that we tend to define it. I think we think of somebody persevering or showing grit and courage as that person who's like, yeah, I'm hella motivated and I'm going to keep going no matter what. And for me, sometimes perseverance looked like feeling so suicidal and saying, you know what, like I'm going to choose to not act on this right now. I'm going to hold on for one more day, or wanting to give up on recovery and saying, you know what, I said at one point to my team, like, I don't want to get better, but I still met with them, even though I didn't want to get better. Right. And when I was more motivated and I was able to get some wiggle room in there, they were able to push me forward. But I think recognizing that, again, perseverance sometimes looks like crying on the couch and letting yourself feel your feelings. It's that idea where even if only 1% of you wants to get better, like holding on to that 1%, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
So I think that's a very key element, is not 100% letting go of hope, even if it's only 1%.
Mm. Okay. Yeah. So what has I'm sure that in your work you've seen a lot of success stories and you've seen a lot of people come to you, and then at the end of the road there's been some hopeful moments. What are some things that really stand out for you, in terms of things that give you hope in the work that you do and seeing people succeed?
Yeah. So I think seeing people like when they first come to me who are often really trapped in eating disorder, whatever that looks like for them, restricting, binging, purging, compulsive exercise, and seeing people, I think what's most exciting to me is first off, seeing them recover and get better and let go of the eating disorder. but then seeing them move into the full version of the person that they were meant to be, whether that looks like starting a family, like having a better marriage or a better relationship because now they can go out to eat with them, going out and getting ice cream with friends, finding passions and purposes. Some have chosen to go into the field, some have followed other callings. But I think eating disorders, and the way one client described it, which I'll never forget, is, she's in my office and she's like very upset and saying, this feels like a half life for me. Like, it feels like I'm living, but it's living a half life. And now that person, is at the point where she's living a very full life in so many ways. And I think, to me, that's the magic, is not just letting go of the eating disorder behaviors, which is amazing to be able to like eat normally. I know that, like, after a period of rules and restriction, but also seeing people like get that fire back in their eyes and the light back in their eyes and like pursue their true calling. I think that's the best thing ever. And that's one reason I love doing this work, among many.
Right. So success is not just not having an eating disorder or not being the person with such and such label. It's who is the person or client after they've overcome and persevered through the eating disorder. It's the next sort of the positive ripple effects beyond just the not having the eating disorder. What does the fullness look like after that? Awesome. Yeah, so my own experience with disordered eating, when I think about that, I think that I started off with my mindset that I could control my eating. If I can control my eating, then I can control other things in my life, right? So it's not just an eating disorder; it's a symptom of maybe some underlying things in my experience in terms of control, right? But it actually sort of proved the opposite for me. I felt like I didn't have control as much as I tried to gain control through disordered eating. Most of the time I just felt like I actually was lacking control. And I think that's probably true for, I don't have your expertise, but I would assume there's a level of that truth and layer to most people that have disordered eating in terms of not having control of their life in the way that they want and to pursue perfection, but then not being able to attain that. So in terms of people wanting to be in control of their life, what role do you see coaching playing in helping people take back control of their lives?
Yeah, so I think there's a few ways that it does, but one, talking about this idea of empowerment and being able to, I see eating disorders as wise coping strategies that potentially helped you and saved you at one point in time, but eventually they start to take over your life. And like you said, like, it will convince you that this is control, that if I restrict my food, I'm in control. If I do this, I'm in control. But it becomes harder and harder to play out that narrative as you become less and less in control, and it is actually in the driver's seat and it's completely controlling you. So I think helping people to unlearn some of the lies that eating disorders tell them and to recognize, like, how can I actually have agency in my life? What does that look like? And how can I actually work on and treat the underlying issues that are underneath this desperate need, whatever it is, to try to control, to try to numb out from emotions, whatever that need is. And I think, just helping people to recognize that the idea of control is an illusion ultimately at the end of the day. Like, yes, we want to look at what we have agency over, but I think part of being a person is that we have to learn how to sit with uncertainty, right? And I think that can be incredibly difficult for folks with eating disorders, sitting with not knowing the outcome of something, right? Sitting with being imperfect. And I think through that, people realize that they have a strength and resilience that they weren't aware of, because when you've looked your biggest fear in the face and come out on the other side, it's like nothing else that life throws at me. Like, there's nothing else I can't do at this point.
Yeah, you mentioned empowerment and connecting it to agency. I sort of mentioned it from the beginning, right, that I focus on empowering passion, purpose, and perseverance, both at an individual level and in a group setting. What would you say is like your sort of definition of empowerment and what that looks like?
Yeah, so I think empowerment is really people, first off, getting to know their inner selves and then feeling comfortable and trusting, like ultimately having a good relationship with themselves and releasing these harmful narratives that we get from society, you know, which are rooted in a lot of systems of repression. So I really think, again, it's, as people, there's a lot of things that actually can control us, whether it's feeling like we need to have the new fancy car, the new whatever it is in order to be enough, like all of these external things. I need to have my body look a certain way and then I'm enough. And it's helping people to connect to their own innate sense of like being enough that came as soon as they were born. And from there, like part of that empowerment is I can set boundaries with other people, right? I can make decisions and I can trust myself to make decisions, because a lot of my clients struggle with that. So really just connecting to your authentic self and not letting, whether it's an eating disorder, you know, a family member, a friend, other people really control you and manipulate you, right? Like standing in your own power, basically.
Yeah, sort of as a follow-up, in terms of like coaching methods, right? Because you've talked about, treating the eating disorder, but really you're treating the person, and there are other things going on in terms of life skills, setting boundaries, things like that, and knowing people's inherent worth. What exactly does your coaching program look like in terms of things you go through with your clients?
Yeah. So I think obviously number one, it's very individualized, because I think everyone's eating disorder can manifest a little bit differently and treatment can look a little bit different. You know, I do therapy and coaching, so there's differences among that too. But I think specifically when it comes to coaching, I view that as really either the added support to a treatment team, or, you know, if somebody is able to do that as a standalone, right? If they're further along in recovery or it's more just body image. And so I see that as, in a boiled down way, looking at the stuck points, like what is keeping people stuck in the place that they're at in their life and in their eating disorder. And so uncovering like the functions of the eating disorder, because otherwise we just bounce from thing to thing. If we don't work on what the eating disorder is doing for you, it's going to go on to workaholism. That's such a common one. It could go to addiction. It can go to these other numbing behaviors, right? Helping people to cope with, like identify, process, and cope with emotions is another really big one that we can work on through coaching. And I'll do things as well, like eating fear foods and snacks with people, you know, lots of goal setting. And it's these small shifts that I think can really add up over time to these really big changes. And so, yeah, I think just again, each client is going to have their own individualized roadmap for what that looks like. And when I first meet with people, I do a whole assessment to get a sense of where they're at, you know, the motivating factors, step points, and all of the other historical factors that play into it. And then from there, we kind of figure that out together.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, there's some, obviously the coaching that I do is in business context and working with business leaders, CEOs, managers, frontline staff, and teams. But there are some, sort of to extend that, I mean, there's stuck points are always at the heart of a lack of progress. Even if you have goals, the stuck points always get in the way. So I do a lot of coaching around what's creating that, and boundaries and ways of getting through that as well. So thank you for bringing that element in it. I'm speaking to you at a time in American context, and when we're talking about, and I asked this question because we're talking about eating disorders and have an appreciation for when people get into eating disorders, maybe there are some other levels of trauma or complexities that are at the root cause of the eating disorder, symptomatic of other things, right? And so I'm asking this question because your background in therapy and coaching, and the uniqueness in terms of your eating disorder coaching, but I'm also sort of acknowledging that we're at a moment in American history and in our time right now where there are lots of reasons for people to feel stuck, and lots of reasons to feel really uncertain about change, and just afraid of anything and everything. So what would you say to people right now that are experiencing some levels of either like trauma, or feeling stuck, or not feeling their full self, or able to be productive because of sort of just our current climate?
Yeah, so I think number one, what I found with clients and my own personal experience is that when we feel certain emotions or have certain thoughts, research suggests that most emotions last for about 90 seconds. But what prolongs them is the shame, the beating ourselves up, the telling ourselves, I shouldn't feel this way. I've heard this with
Mm,
clients, in the sense of like, I should be more productive right now. Like, what's wrong with me? Or I shouldn't be this anxious. And so, really helping people to radically accept and be compassionate that we're in the middle of a pandemic, right? There's been lots of political unrest, there's a lot going on, and that for many people, their nervous system is kind of on high alert. So, both applying that self compassion, like allowing emotions and realizing they'll pass, and then also what can you do to help to calm your nervous system a little bit, even if we can't totally calm you down. Can you set boundaries around watching the news, for instance, or staying off of Facebook or not engaging in Facebook battles with people over politics, right? Is there some kind of practice that helps you to feel more embodied, right? Whether that's gentle yoga or doing a meditation. So thinking about ways, again, that you can soothe and calm your nervous system.
mm,
And I'll share for myself something that I started doing in the pandemic, which I find to be very relaxing, is watercolor. And I've never been, my whole life, I never thought I was artistic or could literally do any kind of art. And I started doing it, and it's incredibly soothing. And actually, research shows that when you're in that flow state, right, engaged in an activity, whether it's art, whether it's writing, like whatever that is for you, it
mm,
gives your brain a break, and it really can help you ultimately be mindful in the present moment. And when we're mindful and we're really in the here and now, right? Like when I'm watercoloring that tree, I have to be really focused. It's really like the whole world kind of shuts out, right? I'm
mm.
not ruminating about what's that thing I have to do for work. I need to answer emails. So as many things that you can do to be in the present moment and like find that state of flow, I think can also be really helpful.
Mhm. Yeah, it's the term that's mostly used for that is self care, self compassion. I heard somebody yesterday refer to it as a brain break, which I thought was like a really cool and helpful way of thinking about it because it's still helping you be productive, right? I think Americans especially are so obsessed with productivity and working, even when maybe it's not the most productive time. But I think a brain break and allowing yourself to give yourself space to be productive when needed is really helpful. So awesome. Yeah. I mean, I've seen all those watercolor. That explains why my Instagram feed is blowing up with your watercolor feeds. Now I know why. I was like, oh, cool. Yeah, so you've obviously been successful not only in your own recovery, but using your personal experience and your expertise in your own life as the body would test to, and all the things you've done in your career. What do you think are the like key ingredients to your success?
Yeah, so I think the key ingredients are probably one, like going through my own recovery. And it doesn't have to be recovery, it could be anything, like overcoming something really tough that you thought you could never, ever overcome has given me this real belief in myself. And
Mm,
so, something that I don't struggle with a lot, which I know many, it's so normal for people to struggle with, is not like I feel pretty confident, right, in myself in multiple areas. And it's not that I never have an insecure moment. Like, of course, I'm a person, but I think I have a strong belief that I'm resilient and that I can cope with whatever happens, right? So, anytime, and that's another thing I would say I do is I'm open to taking very like smart risks and being brave. And I think that that
mm,
is also really important. So, just connecting the two, I guess I will decide like what is a risk that I need is helpful for me to take in my business. And then I'll think about, okay, worst case scenario, if XYZ happens, how could I get back to where I am right now? How could I help lessen the likelihood, but how would I cope if that
mhm,
happened, right? And this comes from Tim Ferriss, who talks about fear setting, which is the opposite of goal setting. Um, so yeah, I think my willingness to take risks that other people might be afraid to take or scared to take, my strong belief in myself, which also just comes from being so passionate because I love this so much and because I think this work is so important. I really see like for me, doing media appearances, writing the book, it's nice to do those things, but it's less of like a resume builder and more of a, how can I reach more people? How can I get my message out there? I mean, at the end of the day, when it comes to the book, it's like I make hardly any money off of the book, right? Like almost nothing. And have paid money to have someone help me with the references and whatnot. So
Mhm.
I really did that both for the legacy piece of like wanting to have a book, wanting to have it out there, but also to like get my message out there. And I think having that passion and that drive coupled with like believing in yourself, being willing to take risks, I
Mhm.
think those things are super, super important. And then the last thing I'll say is when you do have big goals, people are going to naysay. And, I talk to plenty of people who would say, like, why would you start a private practice? Like, you should do X, Y, or Z, or like have questioned or like doubted things that I've done. And I think recognizing that's their own fear story, right? And realizing again, like I was open to the idea of failure.
Mhm.
I also want to acknowledge, I think that came with some privilege too, right? I was in a privileged position where I was able, I had some savings, right? And I could pay my bills even
Mhm.
if, or like quickly find another job, honestly, if things hadn't worked out. So yeah, I would say those are probably the main qualities
Hmm.
that help.
Yeah, one of the things that you sort of talked about, we talked about in a coaching context, the language we use is limiting beliefs, right? And sometimes those limiting beliefs are things that are internalized. Sometimes they're things we learn as a kid. Sometimes, they're socialized either as even in our adult lives. And so we talk about like you have limiting beliefs, you're sort of limiting your opportunities and you're limiting your goals and you're going to limit your success as long as you're always sort of stuck in that hole of I can't do it because and so you have to open yourself up to like the failures that might happen and like I can do it because so yeah um when you talk about like specific risks, I mean you mentioned opening your private practice. Are there other risks that you've taken that have actually helped sort of catapult success for you?
Yeah. So I guess there have been a lot of risks, and I guess the short list would be opening my own private practice, opening a group practice, and then hiring other people, um, pitching Ariana Huffington, and then writing for the Huffington Post, submitting a book proposal. So I guess those are a few of the things, and really just like putting myself out there and ultimately challenging that fear of rejection, because I did get rejected, right? A lot. One of my first conference proposals was rejected, and I submitted my proposal to two publishers. One of them rejected it, said we have enough eating disorder books, right? There were definitely websites that rejected my writing before, but I didn't give up and I kept pushing forward. And I got a lot more yeses than I thought I was going to. And I think we get so paralyzed and so afraid of this idea of failure and what that means that we don't see it as like, all right, like anything I do where I'm putting myself out there, I'm going to get rejected, right? So it's working until I get that yes and not giving up.
All right. Not taking no for an answer. Awesome. Yeah, so you made an allusion to your book, and I talked about it in the bio. I know it's coming out in March. March is coming up. So I'll plug it because it's also almost Christmas and or Hanukkah for people. So before I let you go, I wanted to sneak peek at the inside scoop on eating disorder recovery. So, can you tell our viewers what was your goal in writing this book? And I know probably you spoke about your goal of sort of spreading the word about eating disorder recovery and overcoming obstacles in general. But yeah, what was your goal in writing this book? Can you tell us a little bit about the co-author and sort of how you came about the process of writing with your co-author, and what can readers expect from this book?
Yeah. So ultimately, the idea was to have kind of a smart, funny, like how to guide that was also like witty and sarcastic at times and touched on each chapter as a different recovery topic with a wide range of topics. We touch on trauma, we talk about orthorexia, we talk about binge eating. We have a chapter on fat positivity with awesome like guest authors who are all have lived experience in fat bodies. So each chapter is a different recovery topic, and it was really the book that I wish I had when I first entered recovery, because it would have saved me a whole lot of time of trying to figure out a lot of this stuff honestly on my own, because the therapist that I saw for a long time was not health at every size or really social justice informed. And so that element was really missing from the therapy. So yeah, that really helped me. How this kind of came about. So I have a good friend, Dr. Colleen Reichman, who's also recovered, and she had been working for like a few years on this book, and ultimately, was like, I don't know if it's going to happen, like all of that. But still working on it. Like, it's been a long time writing it. And one day I was like, oh my gosh, Colleen, I have an idea for a book. Like, we should write, like, where it's different recovery chapters. She was like, I already have an outline and I have my chapters written, so you could just do the other half. And I was like, okay, like that sounds perfect. So then that was maybe, I don't know, a few months before I think the publisher reached out to me. So a publisher DM'd me on Instagram, and I thought honestly it was like spam or something at first, and said, hey, like, I have a friend who shared, it was literally a poem I did about keto, like mocking the keto diet, who shared your post with me. Are you interested in writing a book? And I was like, actually, yes, like I have an idea. And she's like, all right, well, we set up a call, we talked about it. And I had to go through the whole process of submitting the proposal, which Colleen and I pulled together very quickly. And then I set aside time. I wrote my chapters. We did lots of edits, and we're still doing some edits. But yeah, I guess it really feels like it was meant to be. And people say that like writing a book is so hard. And it was really, I mean, knock on wood, because we still have a few more months, but it was really not difficult for me. It was daunting in the beginning, saying it's a lot to write, but I definitely recommend, if you can, write a book with your best friend. Like, it's really great.
Noted. Yeah. Yeah, and I didn't mention in the bio, Jen, I think I did the math. We've known each other for like 12 years.
Yeah.
We've known each other in our best and our worst, and in weird times and in amazing times. So I'm glad that I got to like talk to you in this context. Is there anything we didn't cover that you feel like would be good to just talk about from your end? I mean, I kind of asked these questions, but is there anything you want to talk about?
I guess just the last thing I would say, because I see this all the time, is kind of letting people know that no matter what you're telling yourself, no matter what you weigh, how much you eat, how long you've struggled, like what your gender, race, socioeconomic status, ability, age, you are sick enough and you deserve treatment and support. And anybody who's concerned about a loved one or wants to reach out to my practice, they're welcome to reach out. The website is just www.theeatingdisordercenter.com. But yeah, I think that's the biggest thing, is eating disorders thrive in shame and secrecy. And while it's not impossible, it can be difficult to do this alone without professional support. So that would just be my recommendation, is to reach out for help, or at minimum to share it with somebody in your life, what you're going through.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Of course.